Drink Podcast. It's episode 25. I'm joined by Chris. Chris, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic. It's been a hell of a weekend, hell of a week, but nice little reprieve right here. We'll talk some hockey.
Yeah, it's always nice to gather and talk hockey. Unfortunately, Jade couldn't join us this week, so it's the two of us again. We got a lot to get through because we're in the Four Nations break and we're very close to the trade deadline. So that means all the trade talks picking up. Playoff picture is going to start looking a little bit more complete. But we have this mid-season tournament. So there's, like I said, a lot to get through. But first, let's hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $250 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on moneyline spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $250 in bonus bets to use now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts. That's code ITR, and it's only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist free and confidentially 24/7. Must be 21 plus. Physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply. Subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/MA.
Always great to hear from the sponsor, and I feel like I'm beating the same drum because I say that every time. But beating the same drum is Four Nations talk, and this one kind of relates to it because he was supposed to play. And that's defenseman or Dallas Stars defenseman Miro Heiskanen, who is out month to month after a knee injury. The whole thing is kind of weird to me. Is collided with Mark Stone. I know there's a lot of conversation before that with Stone apparently being dirty about it, and it's a freak accident.
He was tripped.
He was tripped. Like, it's a freak accident. At the end of the day, you don't like to see a player down. The Heiskanen injury is a blow for Finland, who has a lot of injury issues, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So Heiskanen being out on top of the Four Nation things, how does this affect the Dallas Stars trade deadline plans? Because month to month means it could bleed into playoffs, and I don't want to speculate. But the Dallas Stars are going to have to make a decision when it comes to the trade deadline. Do they try and swing for another top defender if they were to make that run in the playoffs? So
They're going to have to. I mean, right now, the way that things sit, and we'll get to the playoff conversation a little bit later, but, I mean, realistically, I think we can both agree, pretty much safe in the playoff picture. I don't think they're going to fall out of this whatsoever, and they got to do something because that's a big loss on their back end, and they need to find somebody who, number one, can fill that spot, and then also be a player that can benefit them come playoff time when he comes back. So it's going to be a tough find because it doesn't seem like there's much out there in the aspect of replacing him. I mean, with his talent, but they got to do something.
They gotta swing for a player who can come in and have a pedigree that may not be on the same level as Miro Heiskanen, but somebody who has experience playing top line minutes for a Stanley Cup caliber team. And when you put that filter on it, how many guys in the league are available? And it's a very, very short list when it comes to trade deadline rentals. So that the whole Heiskanen thing it's a very, very interesting thing But it leads me into the next point that we have, Chris, and that's the whole trade deadline talk. And there's been a lot of names coming up, a lot of stuff on 32 Thoughts, which I found interesting. And the first is how Noah Dobson's name isn't entirely out there, according to Elliot Friedman. But just the thought that he might be out there, because Friedman was kind of vague with what he said. Is there was some stuff out there, but he didn't really elaborate. And Chris, I know you listened to 32 Thoughts, where I'm just working through the very last part of the thought line. I find it very interesting when it comes to if Dobson might be available. A 6'4" defender of his caliber, like, it doesn't come around often. Like, look in the case of the Red Wings. They would love Noah Dobson on that team.
Yep.
Every team, if he was available, most likely would be calling, and that's not speculatory. Is the way that Noah Dobson plays is he would be very highly coveted, especially at a time where teams are ramping up for playoffs.
My big question is realistically, and there's a name we didn't talk about earlier coming into this, is what are the Islanders doing in their process right now? I mean, right now they are, I believe, one of the teams that are 7 points out of a playoff spot. And, like you said, Dobson's name's coming, sounds like it's coming off the board. And another name that sounds like coming off the board is Brock Nelson, because they're talking about potentially extending him, where it seems like you might be in that aspect of having the conversation of starting a rebuild, and you could do something now and get a pretty good size trade. I mean, granted, they could wait until the off season, but it just seems odd with the situation they're in right now, pulling names back relatively quickly going into the Four Nations break. It's just very odd.
Well, the one thing I find odd about it is the Islanders have done this in years past. Look at some of the contracts that they got on the books right now. They've extended guys who probably shouldn't have been extended for 6-7 years, and their contracts are going to run until they're 40, 41. So you have this case, you have a very loyal organization. Their guys are their guys. And the way that the Islanders have operated is, if you're willing to re-sign at a certain number, they're willing to. It seems as if the player is willing to re-sign, I'm rephrasing here, they will kind of meet you halfway, if you know what I'm trying to say, Chris.
Yep.
Because, like, they have some decent pieces locked up, and then you start to look at contracts that are going to affect the team, even with a rising cap. And like you said, the Islanders are in a situation where 7 points out of the playoff picture, and we'll get to the playoff picture right away. Where do you draw the line to make the decision to sell, or maybe find one or two pieces that you do move for more long term?
Right. I mean, they realistically, looking at their hockey reference right now, they haven't made it out of the first round the last 2 years. And then obviously we're in this year, and the year before, 3 years ago, they didn't make the playoffs. So at what point do you have the conversation of maybe it's time we start to figure something else out and maybe move on from what you've been doing and do something different and try to be better?
Well, look at how the Chicago Blackhawks, they tore the studs out of the wall. They had DeBrincat, Doc. I know people would say Patrick Kane, even aging, would still be decent, and I'm not arguing against it. It's just everyone thought Patrick Kane was going to retire a Chicago Blackhawk, be a lifetime member of the team. Taves, his situation happens, and they end up with Bedard, guys like Nazer, Korchinski. Like, they have a really good team, a really good future.
They've got a core.
Yeah. They have that core that they were looking for with guys like Doc, DeBrincat. But like I say, they stripped the studs completely out of the wall. They shocked a lot of people doing it. But now you are in a case of look at the future that they've built for themselves. You've got Connor Bedard, who's going to be a superstar, and other guys around him. So I personally think the New York Islanders should be looking to do something similar. And does that start with Noah Dobson? I would say yes. Chris, is that a yes or no for you?
I think so. I mean, the Islanders have a superstar goalie, and you got to build around that.
Yeah. But, typically speaking is looking at many NHL drafts and kind of being in that atmosphere where I am and where I see things. I look at a player like Noah Dobson, and I don't know if you can very quickly go out in the next 2 to 3 NHL draft classes and get a guy with Dobson's physicality and his defensive nature, because Dobson will be a first pairing defenseman for the Islanders for years to come should they build around him and Sorokin. That becomes a question of, okay, where else on the team do you look to sell from? So
maybe they can make a trade with Dobson or Nelson and get somebody that plays pond hockey.
I love it. But the next on the trade segment thing, Patrick Maroon, and this is one that interests me because it seems like every trade deadline he's moved, with the exception of a couple. So I remember last year he was traded to Boston. Before that, he was Tampa, Minnesota. He has a lot of teams to his name. Now he's in Chicago. But given Maroon's impact with Chicago and his impact with other teams, he's won Stanley Cups. He knows what it takes to win, and obviously he's a very well-liked locker room guy, as if he's that highly coveted, even as he becomes more of a sheltered fourth-line player. He's still an impact player, and that's what teams are looking for at the trade deadline, without a doubt. If I were a GM in the National Hockey League right now, you can look at your roster and say, we could use a Patrick Maroon, but then it's the question of who do you subtract?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Chris, here's a hypothetical question for you. If the Detroit Red Wings were in a playoff spot right now, like say they had a large lead, and they are in a playoff spot, but say they knew going in confidently to the trade deadline that they will make it, and they've made that decision that it's all or nothing for them with this core, and they picked up a guy like Patrick Maroon. Is there a player that you would subtract to add Maroon right now? And I know that could be a tough question. And I can see the hamster moving in the head. So,
there's definitely one player I would, but I don't think the Blackhawks would do it, and that's Tyler Mott.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can slide in Maroon to the fourth line of that team and I lose Marat in that aspect, it's something I'd obviously entertain.
And now I say this in the hypothetical of, should the Detroit Red Wings want to bring a guy to their core that has that pedigree but sticks up for your guys, I think that's the guy who does it. And I'm using the Detroit Red Wings as an example here because who on their roster would stick up for Dylan Larkin should he be blasted in the head come playoff time?
If you want to go over the last couple games, Moritz Seider.
Which is fair, but do you want one of your top guys spending 5+ minutes in the penalty box?
Nope. I
So-
think the writing's on the wall, and I thought of this the more I've seen his name in trade talks. It just makes sense for him to be back in Tampa. It makes so much sense.
And Tampa is going to be looking for that pedigree. You lost Maroon. You traded Jeannot away. Can't rely on skill guys and core guys to do these sort of things. So that's why I would be giving you the hypothetical of Patrick Maroon. And I agree with you that it makes sense for him to end up back in Tampa. Because maybe he goes back to Tampa and he's the reason why they get into that playoff spot and kind of roll on more. Because I think the losses that the Tampa Bay Lightning suffered, it's impacting them and it's showing. So we're at this point of the season where Patrick Maroon is available, but who is looking at him? We've said where it makes sense, but players that are available with his caliber of physicality and previous experience playing with top guys where he actually didn't look that bad. Take a look at a team like Edmonton who might just want him to play the enforcer kind of role. So I'm going to say, with all that being said, look at a guy like Jake Evans, rather physical for all the right reasons. Jake Evans, even though he was blasted in the head by Scheifele in I think it was the 2021 playoffs, still kind of getting my thought here, but like he's been a very, very strong kind of grinder-like player. Good center that a team could pick up. I think should the Montreal Canadiens not be able to agree to a contract with Evans, you're going to see him traded to a team that is in win-now mode. But I can also see a team like Boston who needs centers. Like, Chris, when you see a team like the Bruins, like, they could use a center like Evans.
Yeah, they could.
Like, considering their situation, it could shake things up, and maybe it'll be the kick in the ass they needed. Finally, the last forward/player on the list is Vladimir Tarasenko. Chris, from the Red Wings perspective, give me your thoughts on that one.
So I listened, obviously, like you said, we listened to 32 Thoughts today, and that name came up. And obviously the lead into it was there's a lot of teams also, it was part of Evans' conversation, but it was that a lot of players have been told going into the Four Nations that don't expect to be back with this team. Like there's going to be moves made and there's going to be something done. And Tarasenko is one of those names. And, you know, I was surprised at the length of the contract when the Red Wings signed him, that it was a 2-year deal. And obviously things haven't gone the way they should have. Happy for him. He got his 300th career goal on Saturday, but he definitely you can tell when as he's sliding around the lineup, they just don't have a spot to put him. And Elliot Friedman said it today, where it makes sense, he thinks, for Florida to be a team interested. And I could see that. It's almost like I want, in the aspect of losing Tarasenko, I'd love to take Jake Evans and replace that and see if that works. But obviously, I don't see Montreal taking that deal 1-for-1, and I don't know what kind of draft pick they want to move. The Red Wings would want to move to make that deal happen. But I think something has to be done with Tarasenko. And obviously, I see a lot of the practice lines where you see 4 or 5 names on the fourth line. They're trying to figure out who's going to slot in. So moving Tarasenko out, maybe even just getting a draft pick of some sort or doing something, opens up the lineup a little bit more. Obviously, I think the Red Wings are going to add at some point as well. But I think for the time being, you could see a Tarasenko move and they kind of wait to the deadline, see where they're at, and go from there. Because they do have, and we've talked about this the last couple of weeks, with prospects coming that could fit There's some in Grand Rapids. There's some playing other places that can slide into this lineup next season and make them a much better team than what we've seen already, and they've been good as of late. So getting Tarasenko off makes sense. The question is just what is the return and what is Steve Yzerman looking for?
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And when you say the term, maybe it gives teams a little bit of hesitation to maybe trade for Tarasenko. But speaking of players with term that I don't want to say there's hesitancy to trade for him, but that from the outside looking in, that seems to be the case, and that's John Gibson. Anaheim's number one goaltender right now.
He's kind of lost that.
Who's our other goaltender, though?
You're going to have to save me on the name here. Lucas.
Dostal.
Dostal. There we go. He's pretty much taken it over. I mean, great. It took Gibson being hurt and missing the start of the season, but he's looked great, and we'll get into the Ducks team in a little bit when we get to the playoff conversation, but that's what's made Gibson available now. I don't think if Dostal has performed the way he did to start the year that Gibson's in this situation right now. And Friedman mentioned two teams, and I like the idea of Gibson going to either of those teams. But like Friedman said, is Gibson wants to be a number one. And he had said the Oilers and the Hurricanes were the two teams that were linked, I guess, to Gibson. And
see, but I'm just gonna jump in here. In the case of the Hurricanes, you have Frederik Andersen and Peter Kochetkov. They're both stellar for you. Like, is it the case of you trade one out for Gibson? Like, what? Maybe it's me not being able to process why that would make sense, unless he wants to be the number one, and it gives a guy like Frederik Andersen and Peter Kochetkov a fight for the number two spot with less pressure to be that top guy.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's just what I'm thinking. But Anaheim, with one, they already have used one retained salary slot. I doubt they would use it for Gibson unless Carolina sweetens the deal. But you can also make that argument with the Oilers too, is Calvin Pickard hasn't looked that bad. Stuart Skinner has been more than serviceable, but could it be the similar situation for Edmonton? Is you put Pickard and Skinner for that number two role where they're not getting as much pressure to play all those big games? Like that's what I'm thinking. And to me it wouldn't make sense for a team like Edmonton, who rode Stuart Skinner to the Stanley Cup Finals last year. I don't think, looking at the way that the Oilers performed in the playoffs last year, I don't think there wasn't really any glaring issues. You went to the 7th game in the Stanley Cup Finals. You won 15 of 16. It was just a matter of running into a team. They ran into a team that went to the Cup Finals a year before them, and they knew ultimately what it took to get over that hill. Like that's where I'm coming from. Skinner helped them get there. Without a shadow of a doubt, I think if the Edmonton Oilers would acquire John Gibson, and I know Friedman's just throwing it out there, I think it would be a mistake, giving up assets for a goaltender who may or may not make you better. For better or for worse, Gibson going to a team where they don't have a guy that has either taken them to the 7th game of the Stanley Cup Final or a 3 goaltending tandem situation like in Carolina, I think he would be better off almost going to a team where he's fighting to be the number one. Do you see what I'm saying?
I saw a lot of people over the weekend, Red Wings fans on Twitter, saying bring him to Detroit. And honestly, I love that idea. Let him Talbot fight for that one spot. They make the playoffs, and whoever's been the hot goalie, Let them be the star in the playoffs. I really do like it, but I also like Alex Lyon, so
Let
I
Lyon be
guess,
the third guy.
yeah, and I guess you'd have to move on from Husso though. He'd have to go somewhere. Maybe you package him with Tarasenko.
Husso's in the minors though, eh?
He is, but I mean, now you're gonna ask. They're probably gonna put Lyon. Although I don't know if Lyon has the option to go down to the minors.
Okay. From my perspective, I personally wouldn't put Lyon down. Display the confidence in him that he still has to play games and win his spot, but here's another goaltender who we're also going to give games. And he's like, everybody's got to earn their keep at the end of the day. That's the situation if any team runs three goaltenders. But in the case of the Red Wings, is like you have Campbell, Husso, and Casa in the minors. Why would you want to have Gibson, Talbot, and Lyon up top? It's a lot of hypothetical talk, but
Yeah, but if you could move Husso's contract, because he's got $3.6 million on the books right now. That's the thing, is if you can bring in somebody like Gibson, get Husso out of the minors and move that contract. I mean, realistically, I think Husso's a name to watch at the deadline no matter what, as far as goalies are concerned.
oh yeah, I agree with you there. I almost wonder is maybe Detroit says, you know what, we can use a good, or they could use a tandem where they have a guy like Gibson and then Talbot, who's been far above what he was expected to be when he came in. So
He
maybe
just likes
they run
playing
that.
under. He likes just playing under McClellan. He's been a
Yeah.
whole different goalie since McClellan came in.
Yeah. But I look at the trade talk and I look at the whole trade things, and this is only going to expand as the weeks go on until the trade deadline, Chris. But I want to look at the playoff picture with you. The current playoff picture is very, very interesting. And that starts for me with the Florida Panthers, Ottawa Senators over in the East. That would just be an absolute bloodbath.
Yep.
With the way those two teams have played against each other in regular season games. Then you look at matchups like the Red Wings and the Capitals, Oilers, Avalanche, Jets and Canucks, Maple Leafs and Lightning, who have had some really good playoffs series against each other. For me, I want to start with the Jets and Canucks because the Canucks are going to be looking to move away from the Days of Our Lives episode that they had throughout the season. And the Jets, they're going to be looking to get way beyond what happened in the last two playoffs, getting bounced in 5 games and an utter embarrassment for the Winnipeg Jets. If you look at a team like the Capitals, who were bounced in 4 last year, nobody expected them to be here. Detroit, if they get in, it's a tall task, a tall order to fill, but
Yeah, but that team needs playoff experience.
yeah,
I mean, realistically, out of their core, only Dylan Larkin's the one with playoff experience, and I believe it's only 6 games.
I almost want to go out on a limb here and say, if the playoffs were to start today, I think the Detroit Red Wings could pull an upset over the Washington Capitals.
They could.
Because they're an unproven team. They're going to be hungry to play in the playoffs, but then they'd be playing against guys who have made playoffs time and time again. Guys like Ovechkin. Then, Ovechkin's the number one guy on that list for me. But you look throughout their roster and they have that experience up and down. So, Chris, I don't know about you. The other one being the Colorado Avalanche and the Edmonton Oilers. That series knocks off one of the big teams.
Yep.
From the first series. Whoever wins that, I think, could make a run all the way to the Cup final. Because I've seen and I've read a lot of stuff where it says in order to win the Stanley Cup is you got to win the first round and all that, and then the playoffs itself, it's each round is almost an uphill battle. And there's a reason why people say it's the hardest trophy in sports to win. So with the playoff picture, is there like which one stands out to you the most?
I mean, I like the idea of the Kachuk battle in the first round of playoffs with Brady and Matthew. And I obviously, being a Red Wings fan, I'd love to see them get in and do something, but I just want them to get experience. Like I said, they have a core, and we have the rest of the core coming that I think just get those guys experience. They become the leaders of that team that when the next batch of young guys come in, they might be ready to take that next step and keep advancing and making that run where they have their core, like Yzerman has talked about the last 3-4 years of the Yzer plan. One thing I did want to talk about, and are we so sure that it's going to be the Canucks? Like, the East is wide open. The West, I feel like everything up to Colorado is pretty much safe. The Canucks moving off Miller and the pieces they brought in, yes, they've been playing well as of late, but Demko just went down with an injury. Who knows how serious that is? We'll find out, obviously, when they come back from break, unless there's an update provided before then. The Flames have been pretty good. One team that they have a steep hill to climb, but they've been playing well, and we just talked about their goalie. The Ducks are 6-3-1 in their last 10. It's a steep hill to climb to get in the playoffs, but is that a team that could get right and just sneak in at the end? Obviously, I don't think they make a run or anything, but Utah's coming. The Blues are doing things. Like, they could be a team that adds at the deadline. They sneak in. I've seen them do it before.
Yeah, no. I think the West is, I think it's Calgary, Utah, and St. Louis is what we're looking at. With the way that Anaheim has played, yeah, they're 6-3-1 in their last 10. On a 3-game win streak, they could honestly maybe string something together, and maybe I look like the bumbling fool here. But to me, it doesn't look like they are built to make that run.
No, not yet.
They have guys who are playoff guys. Like, I'm sorry, if the Anaheim Ducks get in, having Jacob Trouba and Radko Gudas on that blue line is already more than enough when it comes to playoffs toughness.
And Dumoulin.
You look around up front.
That's another name.
Say that again?
It was in Dumoulin. Like, they just have a good blue line.
And like you say, they have a good blue line, but they're very thin up front. Troy Terry and what's his name?
Getting Zegras back.
And like, they have guys who could be their big name players.
Vetrano's having a good season. Strome.
Yeah.
McTavish, unless I messed up his name, but Killorn's been good. And obviously Cutter's been pretty good there too. Like, they're quietly sneaking through, and obviously I was trying to pull up their last 3 wins. One of them I know was Dallas. Again, a playoff team, and the Kings and Montreal were their last 3. But back-to-back wins against, 2 playoff teams in the Kings and the Stars. So the break, my issue with it is, and like I said, they're 9 points out. So, like, do I see them making it? No. Do I like seeing them start to get back to that conversation? Yes. But the break hits, and, they're on a win streak. So, like, now they come back, and are they cold? Is a move, like, is Gibson a name that gets moved over the break, and all of a sudden that's all over with. But I agree with you, like you said, the Blues, Utah, Calgary, those are the 3 teams I could see going on a run and sneaking in the playoffs.
And I think for me, it's Utah the most that stands out. But Calgary, with the way that Dustin Wolf has played it, that could be what gets them over into that playoff spot. But I think with the way that the Western Conference looks, I think that's what we're going to be looking at come end of April when it comes to playoffs and all that. But like you say, over in the East, it's wide open. Montreal's starting to slip lately. 2-7-1 in their last 10. 3-game losing streak. And you were in Philly too, yeah. Just teams that the only team that is really out of it is Buffalo in the East.
And now I'm looking at it, we started this episode with talking about Dobson, and I brought up Brock Nelson. Looking at the Islanders in the last 10, maybe that's why they've had the conversations now to pull back on trading guys. And I mean, they're 7-3-0 in their last 10, and they're all of a sudden 4 points back of that final playoff spot. It's another team to worry about.
Yeah, like with the way 7-3-0 in your last 10 is maybe that's why they're pulling back on trade talk, but then again, look at how volatile they have been all season.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look at the New York Islanders and say if they make the playoffs, it's because they fought tooth and nail to be there.
Yep.
With all due respect to them as an organization, it's just a game of did we just fall flat on our ass here and just end up in this spot? Because they look good a lot. Like they'll go on a good stretch of games where they look like a playoff threat. And then they go on a stretch where they look like they should be in the basement of the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
There's
For
no
example,
middle ground.
The last 2 games, they lost back-to-back games right before the break, and then they come back with Dallas, the Rangers, and the Bruins.
And that could be make or break for them.
Mm-hmm.
Is like we're approaching the late 50 mark of the season. You got teams like Winnipeg, 8-game win streak. Washington, yeah, they just lost to Utah in a shootout. But if you look at certain teams that are going to be battling for top spots, they're winning games, and maybe that break, maybe the Four Nations break is they come back and we see just a way more movement on March 7th because teams want to see what happens with their guys. And then March 7th, the floodgates open and it's just a nut house.
There's definitely a list that's right now this is the pre-trade deadline. Like Tarasenko, Evans, like these are the guys who are going to be moved during the break. But then there's that big list that's coming, obviously, March 7th or leading up to March 7th, where team comes out of the break, they've dropped 3 straight, and all of a sudden they've fallen further out of the playoff picture, and there's moves being made where they're moving them quick.
Well, speaking of Four Nations talk, we covered the pre-trade deadline, Four Nations deadline, but now we're in the Four Nations. It starts Wednesday. Rosters are out. Crosby's in. Quinn Hughes not in. It's a very interesting tournament because it's supposed to be a best on best, but it's 4 countries. Like, I think if you have like a Team Europe or something, and maybe, I don't know, like maybe 5-6 teams in there.
I like the World Cup of Hockey where they had like the North American team and they had all the young kids playing on one team. Like I like that idea, but obviously this being the first year, it's obviously a test trial, and who knows what happens a couple of years from now, whatever, as this goes on.
The one thing that interested me the most, though, Chris, is the point system they are using.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's a test run for maybe flipping the NHL standings to that point system.
I could see that.
Yeah.
It is an NHL sanctioned event, so
that's exactly why I bring that up. NHL sanctioned, it gives the players a bit of a feel of what a 3-2-1 system would look like and how it would feel, but in a tournament setting. So it'll be interesting from that perspective. But with the lines that have come out, with kind of the lines that have come out, it's like you got John Cooper, who doesn't want to name his number 1 goaltender yet, and like other teams have like Connor Hellebuck, Swayman, Ottinger, whereas they're beating the drum on who's gonna represent us in net.
Them and Sweden are my big two question marks as far as goaltenders. I mean,
Well, Sweden had Markstrom and then he got hurt.
right, and now it's up to. I mean, realistically, I see it as Gustafson or Olmark, and which one do you start? To me, they're the scariest team in this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows U.S. and Canada are the two favorites, and I forget what the odds are exactly on DraftKings right now. I thought when I looked earlier, U.S. was plus 100 to win, and Canada was plus 300. But Sweden, to me, they're a team that could make a run in this tournament, but it's going to come down to they could make a mistake on the goaltending, where I think from what it sounds like right now, from what I've read, Gustafson's the starter. I wonder, though, is that having to do with Olmark's injury that we had talked about a while back, where they're not making him the starter for that reason? I'm also interested to see how they do this with three goalies. Like, do they use one goalie per game with 3 games before the finals? Or is it the same goalie for all 3 games? Or I'm interested to see what they do.
I think that depends on performance, though. Because if the U.S. gets blown up with Wayman in net, they're obviously going to pivot to Ottinger or Hellebuck.
I think Hellebuck's a starter for the U.S.
Oh, definitely. But you understand why I'm saying.
Yeah.
And with the way that the Four Nations has, I think they could have had, maybe it's a round robin, and then 1 seed plays 4, 2 plays 3, and then kind of like a short little playoff thing.
Yep.
Because they've already had a hard enough time, or they, as in the NHL, has had a hard enough time moving tickets. And if you look at the ticket prices for it, that's also another massive factor. Now you have to wonder this one thing. Do you go from this tournament and keep it as is, even after the trial run, or do you expand it in some capacity? Because the NHL, yes, they have a lot of their superstars in there, but there's also a lot of really good players from other countries left out. And that's why I think not having a Team Europe kind of defeated the whole Four Nations thing, because Leon Draisaitl not being in the tournament, Ovechkin, the whole Russian conversation, and people are opinionated on that. I know that, but not having these big marketed guys in your league come into the tournament that the NHL wants to push, I don't know. I feel like it was very limited. Like, you could have done a Team Europe, Team North America kind of deal. But then again, you would get a very loaded Canada or very loaded North American roster. But I think that ultimately comes down to the trial run that we talked about. So, do you have any more thoughts on that, Chris?
No, I'm just excited to see it.
Okay.
The tough part, I think, is the scheduling. Because to me, I love the fact that you're looking at Wednesday is Canada, Sweden. Then you have Thursday is USA, Finland. But then you get into Saturday, which weekend day, totally fine with that, where it's 1 o'clock and 8 o'clock for the next games. But then you go into Monday, which is President's Day, and it's 1 o'clock and 8 o'clock again. I think you could have done Monday, Tuesday, both at 8 o'clock, and then had the finals on Thursday. And then you're getting more viewers, because some people still have to work on Monday, and they're not going to see the 1 o'clock game. And that can hurt. That obviously, I believe on Monday it shifts to Boston. So now you're coming to, the U.S. side of the tournament, and it's a holiday for some people, but not for others. And so now you're cutting into people going to the game.
Yeah, but this has been a thing forever. Like people would have planned around it already.
That's true. That is true.
So
I don't know. For my aspect, though, it's gonna stink to not watch it at work.
yeah, as I think we'll leave it there. Is we'll have more Four Nations and obviously more trade stuff to talk about next week. But
Yep.
I think that's where we're gonna leave it. We'll see you next week and take care.
Have a good week, everybody.